Hello everyone, Phoenix Knight here. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to a new playthrough on the channel. Last week we debuted Age of Innovation on the channel, so now we're heading to another familiar universe. This week we're going to play Aeon's End from Indie Boards and Cards. As we have established in the several times we've featured this game on the channel, we're breach mages defending Gravehold from the Nameless. I was originally planning to continue my playthrough of Aeon's End Legacy of Gravehold in this video, but problems I had with that game and the unexpected flood of narrative are making me hesitant on bringing that game back to the channel. With that, let's go meet our Magi. Player 1 today will of course be Celidia, one of the Magi that we've featured on the channel before. You can see the configuration of her breaches. 1 starts open, 2 starts starts on the left-hand side, as does 3, and 4 starts toward the bottom. So we'll take a look at Celidia's special abilities. She comes with quite a few. First, we've got Vengeful Shadows. When you cast 2 or more spells during your casting phase, gain 1 ether. Then we have Power Word Silence. Once per turn during your main phase, you may discard a card in your hand. If you do, silence a minion, which, to translate what silence means, they'll get one of these tokens over their persistent ability. The persistent ability will not trigger, and then the silence token will come off. And her last special ability for her charges is Will of the High Priestess during her main phase. Gain a spell from any supply pile, and you may place that spell into any ally's hand, and any ally gains 2 charges. And as we see, it takes 6 charges to acquire that, to be able to activate that. So that'll be a total of 12 ether that we'll need to spend at a rate of 2 per. So with that, let's go meet Celidia's partner. Celidia's partner today is the other mage in that first playthrough of Aeon's End Legacy, Nyrissia. Both of them will have 10 health to start with. Gravehold has 30. So Nyrissia has the same breach configuration as Celidia, and we'll take a look at her abilities. First up, Nyrissia has Dark Blessing. Once per turn during your main phase, you may discard a card in hand. If you do, deal 1 damage. Then we've got Rage of the Sith. Once per turn when you focus or open a breach, deal 2 damage. And that's to any target, as is Dark Blessing. And for Netherlord's Wrath for 6 charges, cast any player's prep spell without discarding it. That spell deals 1 additional damage, and any player returns a spell in their discard pile to their hand. So we've got some very powerful stuff there. We'll actually go through their starting hands when we get into their first turn of the game, so let's move over to the market. I decided to keep today's market fairly simple, so we'll start off first with our 3 gems. Jade for 2 ether is simply gain 2 ether. Then the rest of our gems cost 3, where we've got the Haunted Barrelite first. Gain 2 ether or discard a card in hand. If you do, gain 2 charges. Then we've got the Briswood Amber, also costing 3. When you gain this, you may place it on top of your deck and gain 2 ether. Next we have our 2 relics. A Flexing Dagger first up. The next time you focus or open a breach this turn, it costs 3 ether less. Or destroy this to deal 1 damage. And a Brain Knife, which also costs 3 ether. Gain 1 charge. Any ally focuses their closed breach with the lowest focus cost. Then our 4 spells, which are the most expensive cards we've got. Phoenix Flame for 3 ether. Cast to deal 2 damage. And you may lose 1 charge to deal 2 additional damage. Any effects that modify spell damage would modify both of those. Next up, we've got Breach Flare. Cast to deal 2, also for 3. Cast to deal 2 damage and focus any player's 3 breach. Could be useful with Nyrissia's Rage of the Sith. Then we're going to play around with Pulse tokens today, which we normally don't. Sparking Siphon. When you gain this, gain 2 Pulse tokens. Cast to deal 2 damage, and you may lose 1 Pulse token. If you do, any player gains 1 life. Pulse tokens are cards tokens you can get for additional effects. And then we've got a Bending Beam for 5. Cast to deal 2 damage. If the spell was cast from an opened breach, deal 3 additional damage, which I think would get modified with any breach increase effects. But that's it for the market. Now let's go meet tonight's nemesis. Our nemesis for tonight is actually one of the bosses from Aeon's End Legacy. So let's take a look at Maelstrom Risen. Starts off with 65 health, which I've got on the dial over here. Whenever we unleash, we draw a card from the beacon deck and place it into play. We're not playing with the increased difficulty. And then as far as additional rules, when Maelstrom Risen's Assault Turn Order card is drawn, Gravehold suffers 1 damage per beacon in play. Then, Maelstrom Risen takes in turn as normal. The Assault Turn Order card is considered a Nemesis Turn Order card. We'll come back to the other rules, but I did want to point out that that's what the Maelstrom Assault Turn will look like. So, yeah, those are not going to be very fun for us. It takes the place of a normal Nemesis card. But like it said, it does count as a Nemesis card for everything else. Then coming back to the additional rules, when a beacon is discarded, place it in the beacon discard pile next to the beacon deck. This isn't the same as the Nemesis discard pile. When the beacon deck is empty and a card would be drawn from it, shuffle the beacon discard pile and place it face down to form the beacon deck. When there are 10 beacons in play, Maelstrom Risen opens a massive destructive breach and the players lose. And I don't think Okay, we did all the setup there, but we will take a look at the flavor text. If it ever wants to focus, that is, we will. There we go. We should have known better than to consider Maelstrom defeated. In our hubris, we left our old lives behind and considered Maelstrom buried along with them. Yet it was siphoning power the entire time we've been on the surface, slowly gathering strength to take revenge. And now, the time for its revenge has come. It looms over New Gravehold, and I fear there is little we can do to stop it. In our first battle against Maelstrom, we only managed to survive through Desmodia's sacrifice. This time around, we cannot afford to lose another. Our newest breach mages need to be stronger than any before. They must triumph. And I've got our 2 beacons in play that we start with per the additional setup. So our first beacon, 2 health, and immediately any player discards a card in hand. So we do get to ignore that. And our second beacon, Grave Beacon, immediately the player with the lowest life suffers 1 damage, but only has 1 health, thankfully. Which means Nyrissia could probably pick them both off rather easily, but I think we're all set there, so let's move back up top to get our first shot set, and I think that'll probably be where we start the game. We'll grab the turn order deck up here, give it a quick shuffle, and a cut. Unlike in most games, where there's usually a turn structure based on moving around the board, the turn order deck is what determines the turn order in this game, which I really kind of like, actually. It gives it that real RPG boss fight feel that I really enjoyed from back in the day. So we'll give that a cut, and then the turn order deck's ready to go, so our first turn will be player 2, so let's move down to Nyrissia. We start off with the casting phase in the first turn, where we can cast any of our prepped spells to open breaches. We have to cast anything prepped to closed breaches, and those spells go on top of the discard pile as they're cast, but again, nothing there. Then we have the main phase, where we can resolve we can resolve basically anything we can, whether it's playing a gem or relic card, gaining a card or a charge, focusing or opening a breach, prepping a spell to a breach, resolving a while prepped effect or a to discard effect, and I'll explain what those are when they come up later. So, I'm going to start, however, with 2 crystals, which are just worth ether. I'll use those to focus my 2 breach, and then Rage of the Sith will trigger, so I'll take out the Misery Beacon, because I'm going to try to keep those under control. Then I'm not doing anything with 1 ether, so I'll discard that crystal, to use Dark Blessing to take out the Grave Beacon. Then I'll prep a Nyrissia's Fury to her 1 breach, which I can cast this to deal 1 damage and gain 1 ether that I can only use to gain a spell, and I get a charge. So I'll prep that to my 1. And then since I focused my 2 breach, I can prep a Spark, which will deal 1 damage, but I will have to cast that on Nyrissia's next turn. So with that, the crystals will move to the discard pile, and then we'll draw back up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take a quick look, and we see that we've got 3 more crystals and 2 sparks to go with that. So that's it for Nyrissia's first turn. Next up from the turn order deck, we have player 2 again. So it's a good thing we're right here with Nyrissia, which means we'll start off by casting a spark that we have to. We'll aim that at Maelstrom Risen for 1 to bring Maelstrom Risen, to bring the boss down to 64. Then the Nyrissia's Fury will also get pointed at Maelstrom Risen, which will get her a charge, dealing Maelstrom Risen another 1 damage. And that gives us an ether that we can only use to get a spell. Which, this is a tough one. I think I will, since I'm not going to be able to cast both my spells, I'm going to discard a Spark to deal another damage to Maelstrom Risen, bringing it down to 62. Then I will prep a Spark to her 1 breach, and I've got 3 to buy with, 4 if I grab a spell, and I don't think well, either way I'd end up having 1 float away. So I think I will have Nyrissia grab a Breach Flare. And then I'll let the 1 float away. When your deck is out, as we're going to be going into draw, and you need to draw, you actually don't shuffle your discard pile. The strategy here is in the order you put your cards in. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your cards from your discard pile and just literally flip them over into a new draw pile. So 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll see that we've got some firepower coming out. And now we're back over to the turn order deck. So now we find player 1. So let's move over to Celidia. With no minions in play, getting a head start on this has been super important. So I'm going to spend 3 ether to open Celidia's 2 breach outright. You might be able to see it on here, but there's a cost toward the top, but there are 2 costs as far as your breaches are concerned. There's an inner cost that you can use to rotate your breach 1 to the right, getting it closer to opening, or there's a number at the top that you can pay outright, that you can pay to open the breach outright, and that's what we're paying here. So I'm going to go ahead and open Celidia's 2 breach outright, mostly so I can prep both of her spells. I'll prep a Spark to 1, and I'll prepare Celidia's Spark to her 2. Cast to deal 1 damage. If your discard pile contains 4 or more other cards, deal 2 additional damage, and you get an ether. So we'll prep that to her 2 breach. Move those over to the discard pile, and then Celidia will draw the rest of her hand, which we'll see it's the same as Nyrissia's. Then from the turn order deck, we'll find Nemesis. So let's move up to Maelstrom Risen. The Nemesis turn follows a similar structure to the player turns, where it starts off with the main phase, resolving anything that's already in play, with a persistent effect on it. Since we cleared everything off the board, we go right into the draw phase and resolve it. If it's an attack, we'll basically do what it says and then discard it. If it's a minion, it'll go into play, and it will get with the appropriate number of life, and we'll get the immediately effects from it. But the rest of its effects will be ignored. So what we find here is Daze. Any player suffers 2 damage and discards a card in hand. If that card costs no ether, Gravehold suffers 2 damage, and all of them will. So I think with that in mind, I am going to have Celidia discard. I'm going to have her discard a crystal, which means she'll suffer 2 damage, as will Gravehold. So that will bring Celidia down to 8. And Gravehold to 28. And we want to be careful, because if Gravehold ever gets reduced to 0 health, that's one way we lose the game. So that was a very simple turn. Next up from the turn order deck, we'll find Player 1. So we're right back down to Celidia. The reason I had Celidia take the bullet on the daze was because now Celidia's Spark will trigger for full strength and deal 3 damage to Maelstrom Risen, which will bring Maelstrom Risen down to 59. It's ultimately going to be 58, though, because the Spark will also hit Maelstrom Risen, which will give us an additional ether. At least the Celidia's Spark will. We'll prepare the 2 Sparks for 2 or 2 breaches, and then we've got 3 to buy with, which I will grab. I think with that I'm going to grab with 3 ether total. Grabbing a Vriswood Amber could be good because that would give me a guaranteed 2 ether to start next turn. And I think I will grab that, actually. So when I gain this, I may place it on top of her deck, and I will. So that's all set. That will move straight to Celidia's hand. Then we'll flip this over to 3, 4. We're drawing back up to 5. And we see that we got a big burst of ether coming, but we might need it because the last card of the turn order deck is the Maelstrom Assault turn. So let's move up to Maelstrom Risen. As I explained earlier in the video, when the Assault turn card comes up, Gravehold suffers 1 damage per beacon in play, but as we see, we have no beacons in play because Nyrissia was kind enough to get rid of them for us. So we just go right into the normal turn. Main phase, nothing else happens here, so coming out of that will be Throng Commander with 3 armor and 1 health. Persistent. If there are 2 or more other minions in play, Gravehold suffers 6 damage and discard this minion. Otherwise, any player suffers 2 damage. I'm actually going to go grab some counters. Actually, I'm going to grab the armor counters, and I've got some mini dice that I'm going to use for health tokens, because the last time I played Aeon's End, I struggled a little bit with the counters that come with the game. So, closet opening, closet closing. I'll grab one of these mini dice. 1 damage on Throng Commander. So we want to try to take that out, but we do get the persistent effect. I'll have Nyrissia take it this time to bring her down to 8. That's everything from the turn order deck. So before we start round 2, let's move back up top to look at how the board state's changed. Celidia's 2 breaches open, as we can see over here, and she's got sparks prepared to both of them. Nyrissia's got a spark prepared to her 1 breach, and her 2's about ready to open, and I'll probably go ahead and open that this coming turn. Well, I'll have to give that a little bit of thought. Up in Nemesis land, we've got the Throng Commander out with 3 armor tokens and a health. There's going to be an argument to be made to silence the Throng Commander on Celidia's next turn. Actually, Celidia should have had an extra ether from Vengeful Shadows when she cast Celidia's Spark, but I don't think that would have changed anything. That would have given her 5. No, I'm not going to retcon that much. I do need to pay more attention to that, though. Anyway, the Throng Commander is the only minion Maelstrom Risen has out, and Maelstrom Risen's at 58 health right now. So, let's go ahead and grab the turn order deck once again, and we'll get ready to start round 2. Alright, so the turn order deck's been shuffled, and our first card from it is a Maelstrom Assault turn. Delightful. So let's move up to Maelstrom Risen. Still no beacons in play, thankfully, but Celidia's got to take another 2 from the Throng Commander due to there being not 2 other minions in play on the persistent phase. So next card from the Nemesis deck we find Slice. Power 3. The player with the most expensive card in hand degrades that card and suffers 3 damage. Oh, delightful. I gotta look up what degrading means because it's been a while since that's a keyword that's come up. Let's see, where would I find degrade? Do. That's a keyword, that's a thing. I believe it's something about when you gain a card that's cheaper than that. But of course, I can't find it in here. I'm going to charge, activate your ability. That's not what I want. Evolve. Here we go. Degrade. When a player, an nemesis card forces a player to degrade a card, that player must destroy a card that costs 2 ether or more. Then may gain a card of the same type from any supply pile which costs less than the destroyed card and places it into their hand. If a player can't degrade a card, they suffer 2 damage. So we're most likely just getting domed by that slice. Wonderful. Alright, that's it for... Oh, we gotta get the 3 power tokens for that. Next card from the turn order deck. Nemesis again. So this is bad. This is good and bad. It's bad in that the Nemesis is going twice in a row to start the turn, but it's good in that we might be able to take out the Throng Commander if we work quickly enough. This time Nyrissia will take the 2 damage from Throng Commander, then Slice charges up, and the next card from the Nemesis deck is Whipping Wires. Oh joy. If this is the assault turn, any player suffers 2 damage, otherwise unleash, which puts another beacon into play. So I'm going to grab my 7 health for that. That's another minion toward taking out the Throng Commander, but that's going to be a dangerous minion. Fortunately, this is not the assault turn, but we do have to unleash and put another beacon in place, so we find Grave Beacon. Immediately, the player with the lowest life suffers 1 damage, and we can have either one take that. I'll just have Nyrissia take it, which will bring her down to 5. So the Throng Commander goes there. That goes there. We'll put that there, just to try to make a little bit of room for ourselves. Oh, and then that goes there. Right. Yeah, this is going to be totally brutal. But the only good thing here is that we're going to get the next 4 turns on this run through the turn order deck. So next up we find player 2. So let's move down. I'll get the 1 health for the Grave Beacon. And then we'll move down to Nyrissia. If we leave the minions alive as they are right now, the Throng Commander will actually bite it at the Nemesis's next turn. So I definitely want to do a little bit of work on the Whipping Wires so I can take it out after the Throng Commander bites it. So I'll spark Maelstrom Risen for another 1 to bring it down to 57. There we go. Then looking at her hand, we've got her Nyrissia's Fury, Spark, and 3 crystals ready to go. So I'll start off with 2 crystals to open her 2 breach, which will trigger Rage of the Sith, and I'll deal 2 damage to the Whipping Wires to bring that down to 5. I'll leave that out for the time being. Then I'll discard a crystal to deal 1 more damage to, I guess, the Whipping Wires again, so that'll bring it down to 4. Then I'll prep Nyrissia's Fury to 1 and Spark to 2. Those will move to the discard pile. Nyrissia will draw back up. And we'll see we've got some good stuff coming out. Next from the turn order deck we'll find player 2 again, so both of our next 2 turns will be Celidia. With that, let's see, what do we want to do here? Do we just start chipping away at Maelstrom Risen? Yeah, I think we do. So we'll use Nyrissia's Fury to deal 1 damage to Maelstrom Risen, which will give us 1 ether that we can only use to gain a spell. And Nyrissia will gain another charge from that. Then the Spark will actually hit the Whipping Wires down to 3. There we are. Then we'll prep a Breach Flare to her 2 Breach, and a Spark to her 1, and we've got 3 Ether to buy with, which I think will be... what will that be? I think it'll be a Vrizzwood Amber for her as well, which will go to the top of her deck. 1, flip this over, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll draw all of that. And just to remove the suspense, we'll see that our last 2 cards from the turn order deck are Celidia's turns. So let's move over to Celidia with that in mind for 2 straight turns. We'll spark Maelstrom Risen for 2 to bring him down to 54. Then we've got 6 Ether to buy with. Well, actually, it's going to be 5 and something's getting silenced. I think we're going to silence the Whipping Wires. So that persistent ability will not trigger on the Nemesis's next turn. Then for 5, I think we're going to get a Bending Beam because I want to start working on opening Celidia's 3 Breach. And 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll flip this over for 5. And then for Celidia's second turn, this kind of sucks, but it's whatever. We'll use 2 to grab her a Jade. Then we'll prep Celidia's Spark to her 1, a regular Spark to her 2, and we should have had it actually. No. We cast 2 Sparks, so we're going to take 1 more Ether again this turn. We're going to take 1 more Ether this turn. This time I'm going to grab a Breach Flare. So technically, yes, I should have had 1 more Ether from last turn. I'm taking it this turn since I remembered. Then I keep the Spark in hand, and I'll draw back up to 5. 2, 3, 4. Okay, we got some firepower coming here. And then we'll move back up top to look at how the board state's changed. Nyrissia is down to 5, Celidia is at 6. Nyrissia has 2 charges toward her special ability. She's got her 2 breach open. Nyrissia's got her 2 breach open as well with a Breach Flare prepped to it and a Spark on her 1. Celidia's got her Spark prepared to her 1 and a regular Spark to her 2. Maelstrom Risen's board looks deceptively busy, but I think we have everything pretty much under control at this point. The Slice is going to cause us problems, but there's nothing we can do about that. There's no way we can discard it. The Throng Commander is going to bite it on the Nemesis's next turn, and the Whipping Wires are silenced, so they're not going to be a problem for 1 turn as well. Maelstrom Risen's down to 54 health. Hopefully we can start taking control of this game, but let's see what happens with our next run through the turn order deck in round 3. First card for this round is player 1, so let's move down to Celidia. I was hoping to see Nyrissia first, but no help for that at this point. Anyway, I'll check the discard pile count. We have 4 cards there, so Celidia's Spark will hit Maelstrom Risen for 3, bringing it down to 51. What on earth? That's not here, I don't think, but I'll check that after this turn's over. Anyway, we'll spark Maelstrom Risen for another 1 to bring it down to 50. Other way, down to 50. Okay. Then we have an extra ether from both Celidia's Spark and Vengeful Shadows, now that I'm actually remembering to pay attention to that. Which will give me 2, 3, 4. but I don't think I'm going to use the extra 1. I'll actually keep a crystal in hand for next turn. So 3 I'll use to focus my 3 breach, which is focus Celidia's 3 breach. I'll prep a bending beam to it and 2 sparks to 1 and 2. So that crystal will move to hand. We've still got 1. Remove to discard. We've still got 1 in Celidia's hand. This will all flip over, and we'll see what we've got coming here. Oh, we've got a lot of ether coming. We could probably pick up something big, but let's see what's coming from the turn order deck we find. Player 2, so let's move down to Nyrissia. Whatever that noise was seems to have moved away at this point. Anyway, starting off with Celidia's turn, or with Nyrissia's turn, we'll spark Maelstrom Risen for another 1 down to 49. Then we'll Breach Flare for another 2 to bring Maelstrom Risen down to 47. And then Rage of the Sith will trigger, which will deal another 2 damage to Maelstrom Risen down to 45. And the reason that will trigger is because Nyrissia gets to focus her 3 breach. So it's there. This is Nyrissia's hand. Then since we focused... Actually, let's do this. I'm going to spend 3 ether, which will be the Briswood, Amber, and the Crystal, to open Nyrissia's 3 breach. And we'll see that it's got a +1 damage on cast, which means I'll prep a spark to it. Then I've got 2 to buy with, which will be Nyrissia's 3rd charge. Then we'll move it to the discard pile like so, and we'll draw back up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Next up from the turn order deck we find Player 2, so it's a good thing we're right here with Nyrissia. We'll spark Maelstrom Risen again, this time for 2, because remember, we're casting from an open 3 breach. So down to 43. Then looking at our hand, we're prepped Nyrissia's Fury to 3, Spark to 2, and I've got 3 to buy with, which will be, I think, a Brain Knife. So any ally can focus their breach, with their lowest closed cost. All right, so we'll flip all of this over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, Nyrissia is definitely going to be able to work with that. Next up from the turn order deck, we'll find Player 1, so we're back over to Celidia. Unfortunately, double silence is not a thing, or I try to lock the whipping wires down again. But what we can do here is we'll Bending Beam Maelstrom Risen for 2. Since we're casting from a closed 3 breach, we don't get the extra damage. We're actually going to spark the whipping wires twice down to 1. The 2 damage will go to Maelstrom Risen from Bending Beam to go down to 41. Then we've got a boatload of ether coming. So 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from Vengeful Shadows. 3 of which will open Celidia's 3 breach, so Bending Beam can actually work to its full strength. And then speaking of which, I'll actually buy another Bending Beam, because I've got enough ether to do that. And then just to remove the drama here, we know these are 2 Nemesis turns, but let's see which one's up first. The Assault turn's first, so we'll go into that first, and then we'll have the Nemesis, and then we'll have 2 regular Nemesis turns. I forgot to draw Celidia's hand. That would be helpful. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we start off with an Assault turn, which means Gravehold will take 1 damage because we have 1 beacon in play. To bring it down to 27. Then we start off with the regular Nemesis turn. The Throng Commander's ability triggers because there are 2 other minions in play. Gravehold suffers 2 damage or 6 damage and the Throng Commander goes away, which is actually quite good for us. Otherwise, we might have had to deal with that ourselves. And we'll move it like so. Slice will tick down. That's going off this turn. There's nothing we can do about it. Persistent on Whipping Wires tries to go off, but it can't because they were silenced, and then the Grave Beacon doesn't have a persistent. So our next persistent card, our next Nemesis card, Bladestorm. Gravehold suffers 3 damage, and the player with the fewest opened breaches suffers 2. I'm going to have... I should look at the hand. So Gravehold is going down to 18. Looking at hands, because Slice is about to tick off. Who's got the most expensive card in hand? Well, somebody's getting domed. I'm hoping somebody's got something they can degrade. We don't. So I think I'll have Celidia take this one to go down to 4. And then Nyrissia will take the Slice when that comes up. So that's all done there. And then for the second turn, which is not an assault turn, that'll be important for the Whipping Wires. Slice goes off, and then Nyrissia... Wait a minute, hold on. That's a problem. Because if a player if a player has to degrade a card in hand, but they can't, because all we've got is 3, is a 3 spell, and we don't have any spells cheaper than that, Nyrissia suffers 2 damage, would suffer 2 damage from having to degrade. So she's actually exhausted, which is another way we can lose the game. So she goes down to 0. That was Exacxi, so I don't think Gravehold takes anything from that. Let me just double check. Resolve the Nemesis is unleashed twice. So we have to put 2 more beacons into play, we find. Misery Beacon, immediately any player discards a card in hand with 2 health as well, so we'll put the 2 there. I think we'll have Nyrissia discard a crystal. Actually, wait a minute, wait. She doesn't have to discard from that. Oh, yeah, from the Misery Beacon. Next up we have Draining Beacon. Immediately any player suffers a damage. That's going to be Celidia. This probably isn't going to take too much longer. Alright, so Slice has gone off, and that's got 2 health. Alright, going through the rest of the... So we resolve the Unleash. We'll destroy Nyrissia's 4 breach. Destroys one of their breaches. Yep. Okay, so that one's gone for Nyrissia. We'll make that Nyrissia's envelope. Then we discard all of her charge tokens. So Nyrissia will still be able to participate in the game, but she can't gain life. And when a card specifies to deal damage to the player with the lowest life, it will always target Celidia. And when an exhausted player suffers damage, we deal double the damage to Gravehold. Celidia is very much hurting here. Where if she becomes exhausted now, we lose the game. Alright, so Slice one off. We're going to have to Unleash again, which we just did. Then none of that goes off. So the next card coming up for Celidia, Venomous Coil. To discard, spend 6 ether, power 3, unleash twice. Then, any player suffers damage equal to the number of beacons in play. Yikes. So we need 3 power for that. 3 power tokens for that. That was moderately annoying, but let's move back up top to look at how the board states changed heading into round 4. Nyrissia is exhausted, having lost her... And she's lost her 4 breach along with all of her charges. She still has a Spark to her 2 breach, and Nyrissia's Fury to her 3 breach. Celidia is in a bad way herself, though, at 3 health. She's got nothing prepped right now but she's got a bunch of spells in hand coming up. So, tipping up to Maelstrom Risen, we've got a mess on the board right now thanks to Nyrissia getting exhausted. And the Whipping Wires are going to cause us a lot of problems, I'm sure. And that Venomous Coil is going to need to go. But I don't think we have the Ether. Right now we don't have the Ether to deal with it. But we're going to have to pray we get lucky and be able to survive that long. Which there's far from a guarantee we will. So we'll grab the Turn Order deck. Alright, then we will draw from that and we'll find Assault Turn, Wunderbar. Let's move up to Maelstrom Risen. Starting off with the Assault Turn, Gravehold will suffer 3 damage because there are 3 beacons in play, bringing Gravehold down to 15. Whipping Wire, since it's the Assault Turn, any player suffers 2 damage. Actually, since it specifies any player, I don't want to be dealing too much damage to Nyrissia because double the damage to Gravehold is going to cause us to go through that very quickly. But yeah, I think we have to because there are too many effects that deal 1 damage in the game where it would just hit Celidia and we'd just lose. So Gravehold will have to take the 4 damage. Going down to 11. Beacons don't have any persistent effects, then Venomous Coil ticks down. And our next card from the Nemesis deck. Tremor. To discard, spend 7 Ether. Power 2, unleash twice. Gravehold suffers 4 damage. That's going to be fun. Alright. Our next card from the Turn Order deck. Player 2, so let's move down to Nyrissia. Let's see if we can clean up a little bit of this mess. So I'm going to use Nyrissia's Fury and Spark to take out the Whipping Wires, which will give me 3 damage to take it out, 1 Ether that I can only use to get a spell, and Nyrissia gets a charge. So the Whipping Wires have been defeated. We'll slide all of that. Then we have 1 Ether that we can only use to get a spell. 2. So ultimately, I think we're going to discard the crystal to trigger Dark Blessing, which will actually take out the Grave Beacon. Not that I think that's going to be doing much for us anyway, other than trying to keep the minions under control. Actually, we do have 3 from the Vriswood Amber, which I'll grab a Sparking Siphon with that, which will give me 2 Pulse tokens. Not that I think this is really going to matter. Then I'll prep a Breach Flare to 3 and a Spark to 2. Move that to the discard pile. We'll draw back up. Okay. And then next from the Turn Order deck we'll find Nemesis. So we're right back up to Maelstrom Risen. Beacons don't do anything on Persistent. Venomous Coil and Tremor both tick down. Next card from the Nemesis deck we find Dispel. Unleash twice. The player with the most prepped spells discards their most expensive prepped spell, which means Nyrissia will discard her Breach Flare, and then we have to unleash twice, putting 2 more beacons into play. So first beacon up is a Guardian Beacon with 1 shield, with 1 armor and 2 health. Next beacon is a Protective Beacon with 3 health. This is getting more out of hand. Fortunately, the Nemesis won't go again on this run through the deck. So next up we'll find, on the Turn Order deck, Player 1, so let's move down to Celidia. No persistent minions, which is fortunate, but we still have a big problem on our hands. I'll prep a Breach Flare to her 3, Celidia's Spark to her 2, even though I'm getting ready to shuffle, and a Spark to her 1. And I've got 2 to buy with, which I think is just going to be a Jade because there's nothing I can silence right now. And we'll draw 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. That's not great, but let's see what comes out of the turn order deck. We'll find player 2, so we're back over to Nyrissia. Unfortunately, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but we're going to spark Maelstrom Risen for 1 down to 40. Then I'm going to use Brain Knife to gain a charge. And Celidia will focus her 4 breach. Then we'll prep a Spark to her 1 breach. And I've got 3 to buy with. I'm going to grab a Phoenix Flame with that. And just hope at this point, even though I know I'm hoping against hope at this point. If we can get the board under control, but I don't think we can. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I'm not liking what's coming out of Nyrissia's hand right now. Looking at the turn order deck, we find that we've got Celidia's turn, so let's move down to Celidia. We need to cut some of this damage down pronto, so I'm going to start off with a Breach Flare to take out the Misery Beacon. Then I'm going to use Celidia's Spark and the regular Spark to take out the Draining Beacon, which will give me another Ether. So I'm going to use this to track how much Ether I've got, so the Draining Beacon's gone. Okay, then I'm going to prepare... this is actually pretty useless. So Celidia focused that, which means she can prep to it. Prep a Bending Beam there, then a Bending Beam to 3, 2 Sparks, and I've got 2 to buy with, unless I want to use that to silence something, but I really can't. I'll just grab a Jade with it and hope like hell that I survive this next Nemesis turn, but I don't think I am. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, there's a chance. Slim, but there's a chance. Let's move back up top to look at how the board state's changed. Celidia's got spells prepped to all 4 of her breaches thanks to Nyrissia's Brain Knife last turn. She's got Sparks to her 1 and 2, and Bending Beams to her 3 and to her focused 4. Nyrissia's got a Spark on her 1 breach. Basically, we're praying that Celidia goes before Maelstrom Risen goes, because if Maelstrom Risen goes first, then we're going to lose the game. Our only chance is basically going to be to take out both of these beacons, which I think we can do, but we'll have to see how that goes. Speaking of which, we see that Venomous Coil and Tremor are both ready to tick down, are both ready to go off. So I think Celidia is probably going to need to take care of the Venomous Coil, because we can't have... Because if Gravehold, if we unleash twice and Gravehold suffers 4 damage, well, any player suffers 4 damage, that would just kill Celidia and probably end the game. And then Gravehold suffering 4 damage would do it again, unless we're able to cut down... Unless we're able to take those beacons out, and we might have to. But let's see what happens when we reshuffle the turn order deck. The Assault turn is probably the most fatal, but I think the Nemesis turn is just fatal anyway. Unless we get very, very lucky. Stranger things have happened, though. First up, we're going to find Nemesis turn, which is probably just fatal, but let's move up to Maelstrom Risen. Venomous Coil will go off first. Tremor will be not long behind it. Since that's going off, we have to unleash twice, which will put 2 more beacons into play. So here we'll find another Guardian Beacon with 1 armor and 2 health. And a protective beacon for 3 health. Then any player suffers damage equal to the number of beacons in play, which no matter how we do it, we'd lose the game. Because Tremor's getting ready to go off as well, which will unleash twice, and then Gravehold will suffer 4 damage. So if we send 4 damage at Nyrissia, that would send 8 at Gravehold, and then Tremor would finish Gravehold off. Sending it at Celidia, which we're going to have to do, I think, brings her down to 0, and both of our Magi are exhausted, and we've lost the game. So, let's move back up top to wrap this video up. That ended up being a pretty tough one. We just couldn't get that... I think we just let that Throng Commander linger for a little too long. He kept chipping away at our health in 2 damage bursts, and when we only have 10 health to work with, that's not a lot of damage at all. That's not a lot of health that we have to work with. So, yeah, that was rather unfortunate, but that will do it for this playthrough of Aeon's End. Tomorrow, Mandy, Jacqueline, and I will be paying a visit to Jester's channel to play Arkham Horror the card game. We'll be doing a Carcosa-themed Curse of the Rougarou as part of the fall campaign. I'll put a link to Jester's channel in the description down below. Speaking of the fall campaign, Sunday, that comes to an end with the last scenario, Return to Dim Carcosa. Next week, we're having another debut game as we play Call to Adventure, Epic Origins. Thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on notifications so you get my content. Be well, stay safe, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll be back with more videos in the future. Until then, take care everyone.